guys, it's Stephanie, and I'm going to be talking about India, the country at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, and about the time period within a passage to India. So, the British East Indian Company, by the end of the 1800s, had pushed the French out of South India, forced the Mughal Empire to recognize company rule over Bengal, and had taken control over large territories and had become the core of Bombay presidency. So essentially, at this time, it's called the British Raj, or the British reign or rule. The British Raj over India aimed to both introduce administrative and social reform, to hold and support the Indian allies by respecting Indian social and religious customs, though these were contradictory goals that led to many inconsistencies in the British policies towards India. Geographically, the British Raj extended over almost all present-day India, including Pakistan and Bangladesh, with exceptions such as Goa and Pondicherry. Not sure if I'm saying that right. And it also included at times parts of Aden, Lower Burma, Upper Burma, British Somaliland, and Singapore. Burma was separated from India and had been directly administered by the British Crown, in 1937, and its independence was in 1948. Education-wise, in India, during this time, the East India Company had made schooling a priority for the British reign. Thomas Macaulay favored the replacement of Persian by English, the English language, as the official language. So instead of them speaking Persian, they would now be speaking English. So they taught in English, they wrote in English, and they also were teaching the Indian locals to speak in English so they could also teach in English. There were many elementary and secondary schools that were opening up all over India, and including some universities. So now on to the government. Before 1850, the British government relied on the Sepoy military power, which are the local Indian troops, so the Indian army essentially. They also relied on the disarmed warriors of the Indian state. They gave free rein to Christian missionaries to do what they needed to do, and they established a private land ownership system in order to ease tax collection. But yet, at the same time, British bolstered the traditional power of the princes and holy men and invented traditional rituals to celebrate their own rule. So this led to a lot of disrest and a lot of rebellions that happened throughout this time period, which hopefully Jade will talk a little bit about those with the colonized and the colonizer. But the main one is the Sepoy Rebellion. It was a British political and economic influence had benefited the Indian elites and created jobs in some sectors. It did bring new oppression to the poor and caused the collapse of the traditional textile industry that was going on in India. And it also created discontent among the needy, and particularly among the Indian soldiers left to the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. Yet the rebellion was suppressed in 58, but it kind of shook the British a little bit. It showed them that they needed to have more control over the locals. Essentially, political reform and industrial impact happened because of this rebellion. After the rebellion, the British eliminated the traces of the Mughal and company rule and installed new governments that was administered from London. So this new government continued to emphasize both tradition and reform, and maintain Indian princes in luxury and stage elaborate ceremonial pageants known as dubars. The failure of the rebellion in 1857 prompted some Indians to argue that the only way for Indians to reign in control of their country was to reduce the country's social and ethnic divisions and promote a pan-Indian nationalism. So this is the beginning of their own national movement. Then the Indian Civil Service was created. It was an effective bureaucracy controlled by Indian masses. You could be recruited into the ICS, but you had to take an examinations, and they were open to everyone, but most of the Indian locals were put into lower positions and not administrative positions within the Indian civil service. So British India. Kind of after 1857, the British government expanded the production and export of agricultural commodities. They built an irrigational systems, railroads, and telegraph lines. So this allowed freer movement of the people into the cities, which unfortunately caused the spread of cholera, which caused a lot of widespread panic. And the cholera was brought under control when the new sewage systems and filtered water systems were installed into the major cities in the late 19th century. These diseases, caused panic, and it caused famines, and it just caused a lot of population to drop in India at the time because a lot of people were dying. Then we have another movement. Excuse me, I'm probably not pronouncing this correctly, but it's the Brahmo Samaj movement. Happened in the early 19th century, and it tried to reconcile Indian religious traditions with Western values, and reform the traditional abuses of women. But after 1857, Indian intellectuals tended to turn towards Western secular values and Western nationalism as a way of developing their own pan-Indian nationalism that would transcend regional and religious differences. Kind of after this, as a way to promote the pan-Indian nationalism, the Indian middle-class nationalists convened in the First Indian National Congress in 1885. The Congress promoted natural unity and argues for greater inclusion of Indians in the civil service, but was an elite organization with little support from the masses. So then the First World War didn't really affect India all that much, considering that they were a big ally for Britain and that Britain had maintained the other allies of India. So, it mainstreamed political leadership in India through Britain, and, contrary to the initial revolts that had happened when they first came in. And the aftermath of the war was high casualty rates and soaring inflation compounded with heavy taxation. A widespread influenza epidemic had happened, and the distribution of trade during the war escalated human suffering in India. So they were essentially using them for their service, kind of the same thing that happened with the African Americans and everything like that. So that's kind of like a background of India at the time. Hopefully you got all that and I wasn't talking too fast. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and E.M. Foster himself within the time period of the book. So at the time of Foster's visit to India, the British government had officially been ruling India since 1858. And this was after the rebellion, of course, in 1857, in which, again, the Indians attempted to regain rule from the British East India Company. The East Indian Company had been gaining financial and political power in India since the 17th century. So by the time that Foster got to India, British had full control over India. And though England had promised Indian people a role in the government in exchange for their aid during the war, India did not win independence until 3 decades later in 1949. So they kind of gypped them from their promise. I mean, they eventually made good on it, but it took a while for India to gain independence from Britain. So Foster began writing a passage to India in 1913, just after his first visit. And the novel wasn't completed until his second stay in India, which was in 1921. So he actually served as the secretary of the Maharaja of the Dewas state, senior. So the book, which was published in 1924, examines the racial misunderstandings and cultural hypocrisies that characterize the complex interactions between Indians and the English towards the end of the British occupation in India. So it's looking more towards the end. So after the World War, after, all of this stuff, all of the rebellions had gone on. So, and as you notice from reading the novel, Foster has a great sympathy for his characters, which was because he went to India knowing already all about the Indian struggle and everything that they had gone through from a friend of his. And so he actually preferred Indian society over British England society. So let me see. I lost my place. Sorry. These tendencies are so like his the tendencies to sympathize with the characters and show one side of the argument are all evident. Sorry, lost my place. So it's a traditional and social political novel, unconcerned with the technical innovation of some of his contemporary writers at the time, and it's concerned with representing the chaos of modern human experience through the patterns of imagery and form. So that's just kind of like a little bit of background on India at this time, and then the book when he was writing it. So he was writing it after or during kind of India gaining independence. So I hope you guys are doing well. I miss you guys a lot. It's fun working at the Capitol, but I definitely do miss being in class, and I've enjoyed the lectures and everything. So hopefully you've enjoyed this, and I will see you guys at the beginning of April. Okay.